Good morning, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I figured have some time this morning. I can say something corny and say like the grind don't stop or some shit like that, but I can't sleep in. So I've been up for already. Been able to take some notes on today's slate of games on Thanksgiving. First and foremost, happy Thanksgiving. Very thankful to be in this space. Very thankful for the relationships I've built in here and to be out here talking fantasy football again. So, quick video, just going through the games, nothing crazy. I got 3 games today, so just quick fire thoughts on all the games. Happy Thanksgiving, like I said. So, stick with me here.
I play to win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win.
All right. So, quick fire thoughts for today's games. You have 3 games, so make sure you guys check your lineups. I know there's some last minute questionable guys on the slates here, so pay attention to any news that breaks for that and adjust your lineups accordingly. So, let's get into things here. First and foremost, we have my Chicago Bears, which are going to be not as fun to watch, in all honesty. I don't want to bitch about a game, but I do wish Justin Fields was out there playing. But let's talk about the Bears versus the Lions, the first game of today. David Montgomery, I want to touch on briefly here. Week 4, he played the Detroit Lions. He had 23 carries for 106 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 22.6 fantasy points. I really think that this is going to be his get right bounce back game following the injury. He's had 2 games where he's got some decent touches. I think this is going to be his back to David Montgomery scoring good in fantasy game here. He did it again. He did it versus Detroit back in week 4, and Detroit is giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back position. So count on David Montgomery, I'm going to say, to have a really nice game today. 20 plus touches is what I'm going to think for him. I think that he's going to be lean down here. I don't think that we're going to see Andy Dalton throwing the ball for 40 plus attempts today. I think it's going to be a game where they try to be efficient in this offense, try to get what should be a win. And I think that he's going to have 20 plus touches. So look for David Montgomery to have a big game today. I think he's going to be one of the best plays today for all of the 3 games. Darnell Mooney, I tweeted out about him recently, 28.2% of his team's targets. So that's 4th amongst wide receivers. So he's been a good value lately. He's had back-to-back games of 20 plus fantasy points, 20.6 and 23.1 the last 2 games, 31 targets the last 3 games. So I think regardless if Allen Robinson was out there or not, this is their team's go-to guy right now. It's just a fact based on the target share and his performances. Back-to-back games with a touchdown as well. I think today is going to be another day where he gets some heavy targets. If they are able to manage the offense more, I don't know how heavy of the targets that'll be, especially if they are able to lean on David Montgomery. But look for Darnell Mooney to continue the heat because he's been very good for fantasy. Last guy I want to mention just briefly, and the script of the game might prevent him from having a huge day, but he had a slow game last week, Cole Kmet, but the week prior, he had 6 catches for 87 yards, and he went for 14.7 fantasy points in week 9, and that was a really good sign for him. Week 7 through 9, he had 6, 6, and 8 targets. So it looks like the offense is trying to make him a bigger piece of this offense than he's been previously. He does need to hit the high yardage games, though, because we've seen in the past he's had some okay catches, but not for a lot of yardage. Back in week 9, Fields was extending the field with Cole Kmet a bit more. So deeper league guy, maybe a 2 tight end league. Cole Kmet, I think, could be a decent play today just because this offense is trying to get him going a little bit more. Other side of the ball. So I won't go on any typical DeAndre Swift rants or anything like that. But DeAndre Swift's a guy who we have thought of as a guy that's going to lean on catching passes because he's been the best at that for the running back position. Number 1 in receptions, number 1 in targets for the running back position. He's the RB5 on the year. The big thing that we have to respect is the last 2 games, he's rushed for 130 and 136 rushing yards. So again, back-to-back days or back-to-back games for DeAndre Swift, a guy who we think is going to get all his points from pass catching. He's been one of the best the last 2 weeks at rushing. 130 plus yards 2 games in a row is unreal. That's great. I know we all talk about Jonathan Taylor and the tear he's been on, but DeAndre Swift is actually rushing the ball very, very well right now. For fantasy, 5 games above 22 fantasy points. So he's been very good this year. He's been very good. I think regardless of the quarterback, I know that's kind of up in the air right now. We think it's Jared Goff. It might not be. DeAndre Swift is going to be a lock-in play for this game. He's going to be a top 5 to 7 running backs for the week, in my opinion. You're playing TJ Hawkinson if you have him. His floor we've seen, which is nasty. He had the goose egg game recently. He's had a 3-point week, a 4.2 week, but I think you play TJ Hawkinson for the ceiling that we've seen before. The ceiling that we've seen before is 25.7, 20.6, 18.9. He's had 3 games of 10-plus targets. So the Bears are not super friendly to the tight end position if we look at points per game to that position from this defense. But I think for the tight end position, if you have the opportunity for heavy targets at any point, you have to play this guy. And he's top 5, and we've seen some iffy games from him. But again, I think you play for his ceiling, which we've seen a handful of times this year. So that's the quick thoughts on the Bears-Lions. We'll shift over to the next game. Raiders versus the Cowboys. So I actually had a pretty good call last week on the Fantasy Points Extra Point Show. It was a player prop regarding Darren Waller. I called he had 5.5 catches against the Cincinnati Bengals, who are actually decent before last week against the tight end position. He had 7, and he caught 7 passes for 116 receiving yards. That's a Darren Waller we know. So we want to see more Darren Waller games like this where he's catching 6, 7, 8 passes and getting over 100 yards. He had 18.6 fantasy points last week. Dallas is actually top 10 to points given up to the tight end position. So points allowed. So bottom 10 defense against the tight end. So that's a good sign for Darren Waller. 7 catches, 2 out of the 3 last games. So this is what we expect. This is what we want out of Darren Waller. I'm going to say today, for Darren Waller, he's going to have another big game. So he had 18.6 last week. I think he's going to be close to this mark again, back-to-back games today. So count on Darren Waller, 6 catches and a touchdown today. That's going to be my call for Darren Waller. Hunter Renfro, I feel like he doesn't get enough love, and I myself have been a guy who has kind of faded him before. He's a flex play, and he's turning into a weekly flex play. He had 2 17-ish games recently, 18 targets weeks 9 and 10. So I think he had a slower game last week, but the 2 before that, he was right in that 17-point range. So if this is a guy that you plug in and he gets you 15 to 17 points, you are happy because you're going to play him in your flex position. In your flex position, you want to shoot for the ceiling, shoot for the stars. And some people have said, Renfro is a good floor guy, but a limited ceiling. But I beg to defer because weeks 9 and 10, 17-ish points, I think 17 and change. You want that for your flex. So I think Renfro, you kind of have to put him in there just because the targets have been there for him. Ever since losing Ruggs, people have wanted Bryan Edwards to be the next guy that steps up, but he's so sporadic in this offense. I think Renfro is the one you'd actually trust. And then Josh Jacobs. 17 has been the ceiling for him this year. So that's been the highest fantasy outing for him. And he had plenty of games last year where he was in that 20-point range. Lately, I think he just floats around the 11 to 15-point range. The good sign for Josh Jacobs is back-to-back weeks, he had 5 catches. So he's had 10 catches the last 2 games. That's what we want out of Josh Jacobs. I know that was doubted because of the Kenyon Drake signing, but that's the one good sign. So if he is used in the passing game, I think that ups his floor because we've seen his floor in the past where he didn't get passing work and then he had a dud of a week. But yeah, I hope he gets out of that range where he's just kind of floating between 11 and 15 because that's just super plain, super vanilla. Other side of the ball, looks like CeeDee Lamb should play in this one. They said that he had all the steps in the concussion protocol throughout the week. So CeeDee Lamb should be on track to play. No Cooper, no Amari Cooper. So I would expect CeeDee Lamb, if he's out there, he's good to go. Expect CeeDee Lamb to have somewhere between maybe 9 and 10 targets. between would not be much, but I would say a 9 or 10 target game for CeeDee Lamb should be something we would expect for one of the elite wide receivers in the league. Zeke hit 20.76 in week 10, but weeks 8, 9, and 11, he's had 11 or 12 points around that. So Zeke, he hasn't been destroying you, I guess, but I guess if you're rostering him, you're hoping that he hits somewhere in that, 16 to 20 point range, because these games of 11 or 12 fantasy points is not what you expect out of a guy that you probably invested a first round pick in for redraft purposes. Gallup and Schultz have gotten some decent targets, so those are guys you might want to take a shot at in this game. Gallup had 10 targets last game. Schultz had 8 targets, and this was a game without Amari Cooper, and then CeeDee Lamb obviously left with the concussion. But if the opportunity is there, again, to have some decent targets, then I think that both might be a fine play. Schultz had a lot of slower weeks, but when we take guys out of this Cowboys offense, then he has a bigger opportunity. And then Michael Gallup will operate as the wide receiver 2 for this team. So he's a good flex play, I think, with this as well. Hoping for a big Dak comeback game. He absolutely destroyed me in one matchup that I had him. Actually, 2 matchups. I had Dak and Mahomes in one Superflex league, and that was terrible because he had 2.64 fantasy points last week. That was killing your fantasy team. So I'm sure people that roster Dak Prescott are hoping that he turns things around and quick, because that was a dud of a game. Last game on the slate here. We got the Buffalo Bills versus the New Orleans Saints. So let's talk about the Bills. Don't play the running backs. You can't. Unless you are in a super deep league where you are playing everybody who is breathing. Zach Moss, 3 touches last game. Devin Singletary, 6 touches last game. And the most annoying part, Matt Breida, 6 touches last game. So we got a bunch of guys that are just getting somewhere between 3 to 6 touches. I don't trust anything. I like Zach Moss the best out of the group, but he had the least amount of touches last game. So I know a lot of people have been on this. Matt Breida's got the most, flair train, but they're all getting similar touches. So I'm not playing any of these guys. Dawson Knox had his first good game since he's been back from injury. 6 catches for 80 yards, 14 fantasy points. Dawson Knox should be back in your lineups unless you have one of the elite tight ends, top 3 guys, Kelsey, Waller, Mark Andrews, then you're playing Dawson Knox. Stephon Diggs, it's been nice to see him getting back to a top 3 wide receiver sort of play. Wide receiver 2 the last 2 games. He did have that 30-point week 2 weeks ago. So it's nice to see Stephon Diggs doing more of what we've expected, because he's had a lot of decent games through the season, but he hasn't had those massive games like we expected him to have going into this season, where he should have been a top 3 wide receiver. Josh Allen's looking to rebound as well for this game. He had an iffy game last week. And then the last quick note is Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders. They've been under 10 points the last 2 games. So they've been really frustrating because we've seen both of those guys have good games. So to see both Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders have slower weeks the last 2 games, I think they're a little sketchy to play, but I guess you can take the dart throw on a flex play just because we've seen decent games out of them. But that's kind of your call. But back-to-back bad weeks for them. I don't know how interested I personally am. Alvin Kamara is out. Mark Ingram, monitor this because he is questionable with a knee injury. So he's dealing with some issue with his knee, I can say at least. So Tony Jones Jr. would be the next guy in line. And you'd say, Buffalo is actually a good defense. They've been a good defense against the run. Not the last 2 weeks. They've actually opened up against the run and the running backs for fantasy the last 2 games. So keep your eye on Mark Ingram if he is in or out. If not, if he's out, you got the last man standing, Tony Jones Jr. So he might be a guy you would consider picking up, especially if he's able to get a decent amount of touches, because we know that touches for the running back position are key. And with 2 guys out of the mix, he's going to get a lot of touches in this game if he is a running back. If he's not and Mark Ingram is in, you're going to have to play Mark Ingram just because Mark Ingram's been a good play the last 2 weeks. Trevor Siemian, he was tied for the QB4 last week. My concern, and he actually had a good fantasy day, my concern is that Taysom Hill is just breathing down his neck. I think at any time, Taysom Hill can just come in and take over. And I personally, not saying he's not talented, he's not a good fantasy asset and all that, but I'm not a big Taysom Hill fan. The Saints are. And it's plain and simple because They just extended the guy. So my worry with Trevor Siemian, and, he's been an okay super flex play, but my worry is that Taysom Hill comes in at any time. The other guys in this system, we got Troutman hit the IR. I talked good about him before last week, and then he had a good week, so that was unfortunate to see. Traquan Smith, 14.4 and 11.4 the last 2 games. He's had 15 targets the last 2 games. Might be a flex play just because the last 2 games have been okay. They've been okay scores, and he's been getting the targets. So if you're looking for a pass catcher, it's going to have to be Traquan Smith, because I do like Marquez Callaway, but he hasn't been catching enough passes. The interesting thing about Callaway, he's had 3 straight games with a touchdown, but he's had low catches. So it's like, are you really going to bank on a touchdown and then hopefully he gets 4 catches? I don't know if I want to gamble on that. So I think Traquan Smith is actually the safer play, just because he's had the better share of targets. So quick thoughts there. Again, for the 3 games on the slate. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you and your family have a great day. Again, very, very thankful to be in the space. Very thankful to be connected with so many people. It's wild, the relationships that you build from the internet, but it's a thing. We saw it at the expo. It was awesome meeting people, just like doing these streams with people. I've made a lot of really good friendships from fantasy Twitter, and I'm very thankful. I'm thankful for opportunities that I've had. Shout out to Fantasy Points and the opportunities that I've been able to get from them, and then some of the other ones that I've gained from being in this space. But yeah, special shout out to my guy Lorenzo Guerrero. He's grinding out daycare, doing some dancing, doing some painting. He's the man. But again, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for tuning in. You can replay it at any time. But that's my thoughts for today's games. Go Bears.